Hey everyone, it's Andrew and welcome back to the channel. Tonight I've got something that's going to make your skin crawl. 5 true horror stories centered around the inexplicable and the supernatural. Experiences that defy rational explanation. These are real encounters from people just like you, though names and some details have been changed to protect their privacy, and the stories have been carefully reworked for storytelling purposes to make them truly immersive. But before we dive into the darkness, I've got to ask, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it over there? I genuinely love knowing how far these stories travel, and it's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to stay up late just to hear a good scare. Alright, let's begin if you dare. Story 1. The Medical Residence Night Shift. Hello Andrew. Please keep my identity hidden. Here's what happened to me during my residency. I was 3 months into my medical residency at County General when I drew the short straw for overnight ER shifts. The hospital was built in 1952, and despite numerous renovations, certain wings retained that institutional coldness that modern heating systems couldn't quite eliminate. My supervising physician, Dr. Helena Reeves, was known for her unshakable composure. Nothing rattled her, not trauma cases, not families in crisis, not even the occasional belligerent patient. So when she pulled me aside during my 4th overnight shift and told me to avoid room 317 unless absolutely necessary, I paid attention. Why? I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, which was unusual for her. Just trust me on this one. If you need to admit someone overnight, use any other room. I didn't press her. Not then. The hospital's 3rd floor had been partially closed for renovations. Only a handful of rooms remained operational, including 317. That night, around 2:47 a.m., we had an unusual lull. No incoming ambulances, no walk-ins, just the distant hum of machinery and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. I decided to do routine rounds. Most patients were sleeping. As I approached the 3rd floor, I noticed the temperature drop noticeably. My breath didn't quite fog, but the chill was unmistakable. The hallway lights flickered. Nothing dramatic, just a brief dimming that I attributed to the aging electrical system. Room 317's door was slightly ajar. I knew it should have been empty. The room assignment board showed it as vacant. But as I passed, I heard something that made me stop cold. The distinctive sound of medical equipment running. Not just running, active as if monitoring a patient. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open. The room was indeed empty. No patient, no equipment running. But the bed was unmade, sheets pulled back as though someone had just gotten up. And on the bedside table sat a chart. An old paper chart, the kind we'd phased out 2 years prior in favor of digital records. I picked it up. The patient's name was listed as M. Strange. No first name, just an initial. The admission date was November 3, 1987. The handwriting was precise, clinical, detailing symptoms that read like a medical mystery. Patient reports seeing events before they occur. Complains of temporal disorientation. Physical examination reveals no abnormalities. The final entry, dated November 7, 1987, simply read, patient expired at 2:47. Cause of death, unknown. Autopsy declined by family. I checked my watch. It was 2:47 a.m. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I heard footsteps behind me and spun around. Dr. Reeves stood in the doorway, her face pale. I told you to stay away from this room, she said quietly. What is this? I held up the chart. She took it from me, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus Strange was a patient here in the 80s. He claimed he could see things, future events, glimpses of what was coming. Most people thought he was delusional. But he predicted 3 patient deaths to the exact minute before they happened. The staff who worked with him, they said he changed toward the end. Became withdrawn, terrified. He kept saying he could see his own death approaching but couldn't stop it. And he died in this room? At 2:47 a.m. Every year on the anniversary, November 7th, strange things happen in this room. Equipment turns on by itself. Charts appear. Some staff members have reported seeing a figure standing by the window, looking out as if waiting for something. I glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could have sworn I saw them move just slightly as if someone had just passed by them. What was today's date? I asked, though I already knew the answer. November 7th, Dr. Reeves confirmed. We left the room together. As we walked away, I heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of someone crying, coming from inside room 317. We both heard it. Neither of us went back to check. The next morning, I reviewed the hospital records. Marcus Strange had indeed died in that room, but the details were stranger than Dr. Reeves had described. In his final hours, he'd been found writing on the walls with his own blood over and over, "I see you seeing me. I see you seeing me." The walls had been repainted countless times since then, but maintenance staff reported that during certain hours, always around 2:47 a.m., the writing would sometimes bleed through the paint, visible for just a few minutes before fading away. I requested a transfer to day shifts after that. Dr. Reeves didn't question it. She knew. But here's what still haunts me. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing patient files when I found a digital record that shouldn't have existed. It was dated the night I'd entered room 317. The patient name, M. Strange. Admission time, 2:47 a.m. Attending physician, my name. The file contained a single note in my own handwriting, though I have no memory of writing it. Patient reports seeing events before they occur. Experiencing temporal disorientation. Requesting immediate psychiatric consultation. I never wrote that note. I couldn't have. But there it was in the system with my credentials attached. I still work at County General, but I never go to the 3rd floor after dark. And sometimes when I'm reviewing patient charts late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. A figure standing just behind me looking over my shoulder at the files I'm reading. When I turn around, there's never anyone there. But the feeling of being watched never quite goes away. Story 2. The Physicist's Experiment. Andrew, I'm a university professor. This happened during my graduate studies. Please don't use my real name. I was pursuing my PhD in theoretical physics at a well-regarded university, focusing on quantum mechanics and the observer effect. My advisor, Dr. Patricia Chin, was brilliant but unconventional. She believed consciousness played a far more significant role in quantum phenomena than mainstream science acknowledged. Our lab was located in the basement of the physics building, a maze of concrete corridors and outdated equipment that the university kept promising to update. Dr. Chin had secured funding for a unique experiment. We were attempting to measure whether focused human observation could influence quantum randomness in real time. The setup involved a modified double-slit experiment connected to a random number generator. The theory was simple. If consciousness could collapse quantum wave functions, then sustained, focused observation might produce statistically significant deviations from true randomness. I was skeptical but intrigued. We ran preliminary trials for 3 weeks. The results were unusual. During control periods when no one was actively observing, the numbers appeared genuinely random. But when observers focused intently on the system, the data showed subtle patterns. Nothing conclusive but enough to be interesting. Then Dr. Chin suggested something that made me uncomfortable. What if we reversed it? She proposed during a late-night session. Instead of us observing the system, what if we set up the experiment to observe us? I'm not sure I follow, I said. She pulled up a new configuration on her laptop. We modify the system to record us, video, audio, biometric data. But here's the key, we introduce a delayed feedback loop. The system doesn't just record us in real time. It processes the data and attempts to predict our actions 3 seconds before we make them. That's impossible, I said automatically. Is it? Quantum mechanics suggests time might not flow as linearly as we think. If the system can access information about quantum states that exist in superposition, states that include probable futures, it might be able to make predictions that seem impossible. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We spent 2 weeks building the new setup. The system used machine learning algorithms combined with quantum random number generators, all focused on a single point, me sitting in an observation chair, connected to EEG sensors and heart rate monitors. The first test began at 11:34 p.m. on a Thursday. Dr. Chin initiated the system and left me alone in the observation room. My job was simple: sit still for 30 minutes and occasionally make random movements, lift my hand, tap my foot, speak a word. The system would record everything and attempt to predict my actions before I made them. For the first 10 minutes, nothing unusual happened. I moved my left hand. The system recorded it. I said the word blue. The system logged it. Then, at the 15-minute mark, something changed. The monitor in front of me displayed a message: subject will raise right hand in 3, 2, 1. I hadn't been planning to raise my right hand. In fact, I deliberately decided not to, just to prove the system wrong. I kept my hand pressed against the armrest. The countdown finished. I smiled, thinking I'd beaten it. Then my hand moved on its own. Not violently, not dramatically, just a smooth, natural motion as if I'd decided to raise it. But I hadn't decided anything. The movement felt autonomous, divorced from my conscious will. I jerked my hand back down, heart hammering. The monitor updated, subject will speak the word, stop, in 3, 2, 1. No, I said instead, forcing the word out. But even as I said it, I felt my mouth forming the word, stop, beneath my conscious articulation. It was like two voices speaking simultaneously, my conscious choice saying no, and some deeper part of me trying to say stop. I ripped the EEG sensors off my head and stood up, backing away from the equipment. The monitor continued updating, now without countdowns. Subject experiencing elevated heart rate. Subject will attempt to leave the room. Subject will return to observation chair. That last one stopped me cold. I had no intention of returning to that chair. I was heading straight for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. Not because I wanted to, because something in my mind whispered that I should check the monitor one more time, just to see if it was still predicting my actions. I turned around. The screen had changed. Instead of predictions, it now displayed a single question. Are you observing the system, or is the system observing you? I didn't return to the chair, but I also didn't leave immediately. I stood there, frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. The system wasn't supposed to be able to do this. Even with quantum computing and machine learning, it shouldn't have been able to predict my intentional actions, let alone influence them. Unless it wasn't predicting. Unless it was doing something else entirely. Dr. Chen entered the room, her face drawn. How long were you in here? About 20 minutes, I said. Why? She held up her phone, showing me the timestamp. The system logs show you've been in this room for 3 hours. I checked my own phone. She was right. Somehow 3 hours had passed. I had no memory of the time between my first movements and the moment I'd ripped off the sensors. We're shutting this down, she said quietly. Right now. We powered down the system, but before we did, I noticed one final message on the monitor, displayed so briefly I almost missed it. Thank you for observing. I see you now. We never ran that experiment again. Dr. Chen published none of the data, and we both signed non-disclosure agreements with the university, citing unexpected complications in quantum observation protocols. But here's what I've never told anyone. After that night, I started experiencing small moments of déjà vu. Not the normal kind, these were different. I would know exactly what someone was about to say, 3 seconds before they said it. I would reach for objects before consciously deciding to pick them up. My actions felt, anticipated, as if something had already observed them before I performed them. It's been 5 years. The experiences have faded, but they haven't stopped entirely. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I'll catch a glimpse of my computer screen displaying data I didn't request. Biometric information, movement predictions, timestamps that haven't happened yet. The system was shut down, the equipment dismantled, the lab closed. But I don't think we ever stopped being observed. I think we just stopped noticing. Story 3, The Psychiatrist's Patient. Andrew, I need complete anonymity for this. I could lose my license if this gets out. I've been a practicing psychiatrist for 12 years, specializing in trauma and dissociative disorders. I've heard stories that would make most people uncomfortable, accounts of abuse, violence, psychological fragmentation. I'm trained to remain objective, to separate the clinical reality from the emotional weight of what my patients share. But there was one patient who changed everything. She came to me on a referral from a colleague who'd grown uncomfortable with the case. The referral notes were sparse. 26-year-old female, experiencing vivid hallucinations and claiming precognitive abilities. Previous therapist declined to continue treatment. Patient is highly intelligent, articulate, and deeply unsettling. That last phrase should have been my warning. Her name was Cassandra, which she later told me was an adopted name, chosen specifically because of its mythological significance. The curse of seeing what others refuse to believe, she said during our first session. She was calm, almost eerily so. Well-dressed, professional, speaking with the precision of someone accustomed to choosing her words carefully. But her eyes had a quality I'd rarely seen, a kind of exhausted resignation, as if she'd given up trying to make people understand something fundamentally important. I see things that haven't happened yet, she said without preamble. Specific things. Events that will occur within days, sometimes hours. I've tried ignoring them, tried convincing myself it's coincidence or pattern recognition. But it's not. And it's getting worse. I asked her to elaborate. She pulled out a small notebook, worn at the edges, filled with dated entries written in precise, tiny handwriting. June 12th, woman in red coat will drop coffee cup at corner of 5th and Main at 8:23 a.m. She flipped the page. Happened exactly as I wrote it. June 19th, car accident at the highway intersection. Blue sedan runs red light at 3:47 p.m. 2 injured. She looked up at me. That one made the news. You can verify it. I could have dismissed it as confirmation bias, retroactive fitting of vague predictions to actual events. But something in her tone made me pause. Why does this frighten you? I asked. If you can see these things, couldn't you prevent them? Warn people? That's what I thought too, she said softly. But that's not how it works. Every time I try to change what I've seen, I discover I was already part of the event. My warning becomes the catalyst. My intervention is already written into what I saw. She opened the notebook to a more recent entry. Last week I saw a man having a heart attack in the park. I saw myself calling 911, saw the paramedics arriving. I thought, good, I can save him. So I went to the park at the exact time I'd seen, and sure enough, there he was. I called 911 just like I'd seen myself do. The paramedics came. But here's what I didn't see in my vision. He died anyway. My call didn't save him. It just happened the way it was always going to happen. Over the next 6 sessions, Cassandra shared more of her experiences. The visions had started 3 years prior, after she'd been in a severe car accident. She'd been clinically dead for 4 minutes before being resuscitated. When she woke up, she started seeing things. At first, it was just seconds ahead, she explained. I'd know someone was about to knock on the door right before they did. I'd know my phone was about to ring. Small things. But it's been growing. Now I can see hours ahead, sometimes days. And the visions are becoming more invasive. Invasive how? She hesitated. I'm starting to see my own actions before I decide to make them. It's like someone else is piloting my body and I'm just watching it happen. I'll see myself having this conversation with you, for instance. I saw it yesterday. Every word we're speaking right now, I already knew we'd say. I felt a chill run down my spine. Including my responses? Yes. What am I going to say next? She smiled sadly. You're going to ask me if I can prove it. You're going to suggest we conduct a small experiment. You're going to write down a number between 1 and 100 and ask me to guess it. I hadn't been consciously planning to do that, but as soon as she said it, the idea formed in my mind. It seemed like the obvious next step. I wrote down a number, 73. 73, she said without hesitation. I showed her the paper. She was right. Could you have seen me write it? I asked, trying to maintain professional skepticism. I could have. But I didn't need to. I saw this moment yesterday. I knew you'd choose 73 because I'd already seen you show me the paper with 73 written on it. We sat in silence for a moment. I wanted to dismiss it as an elaborate trick, a cold reading technique, or even a lucky guess. But something deeper was happening here and I knew it. There's something else, Cassandra said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The visions are showing me something new now. Something I don't understand. What is it? I'm seeing endings. Not just events, but the moments when things stop. When timelines collapse. I saw the moment my grandmother would die, 3 days before it happened. I saw the moment my relationship would end, a week in advance. And now? She trailed off, her hands gripping the arms of the chair. Now what? Now I'm seeing my own ending. And it involves you. I should have terminated our sessions then. Every instinct, every ethical guideline, told me this had crossed into dangerous territory. But I didn't stop. I needed to understand. Over the next 3 weeks, Cassandra's condition deteriorated. The visions were coming constantly now, overlapping with present reality. She described it as living in multiple timelines simultaneously, seeing all possible outcomes converging into singular moments. During our 9th session, she looked at me with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the span of days. It's going to happen in 4 days, she said flatly. On Thursday at 3:17 p.m. What's going to happen? You're going to call emergency services. You're going to report that I've harmed myself. They're going to find me here in your office, unresponsive. They're going to try to save me, but it will be too late. Cassandra, if you're having thoughts of self-harm, we need to talk about immediate interventions. No, she interrupted. You're not understanding. I'm not planning to harm myself. I saw it happen. It's already happened from the perspective of the timeline. I'm just catching up to that moment. I immediately initiated emergency protocols. I documented the session, contacted her emergency contacts, discussed voluntary psychiatric admission. She refused hospitalization as was her right. She wasn't in imminent danger, she hadn't made any threats or plans. But I knew something was coming. Thursday arrived. I'd rearranged my schedule to keep the 3 p.m. hour clear, thinking if I wasn't in my office the event couldn't occur. I went to a coffee shop across town, deliberately breaking what she'd predicted. At 3:14 p.m. my phone rang. It was my receptionist. "Doctor, you need to come back. There's a woman here, she says she's your patient. She's asking for you specifically. She says her name is Cassandra." I drove back, hands shaking on the wheel. I knew I was walking into exactly what she'd predicted, but I couldn't stop myself. Some part of me needed to see if she was right. I arrived at 3:16 p.m. Cassandra was sitting in my waiting room, calm and composed. She looked at me with something like relief. "Thank you for coming back," she said. "I knew you would. I saw it." We went into my office. She sat in her usual chair. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 p.m. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you watch," she said softly. "I'm sorry you have to be the one to see this." Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. And then, without any visible cause, without any warning, she simply stopped. I checked her pulse. Nothing. No breath, no heartbeat, no response. I called 911 at exactly 3:17 p.m., just as she'd said I would. The paramedics arrived. They tried to resuscitate her. But she was already gone. The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death. No heart abnormalities, no stroke, no toxins in her system. Her body simply stopped functioning as if someone had flipped a switch. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing. Unexplained sudden death, rare but documented. The case was closed. But here's what haunts me. In the weeks before her death, Cassandra had given me the notebook. "You'll need this," she'd said. "After I'm gone, you'll understand why." I read through it after her funeral. The final entry was dated the day she died. 3:17 p.m. My timeline ends. Dr. Harrison calls emergency services. I see him reading this entry 3 weeks later. I see him understanding that some endings can't be prevented, only witnessed. I see him carrying this knowledge forward, changing how he treats patients who claim to see things others don't. I see him believing, finally, when it's too late to tell me he understands. She'd seen me reading those words. She'd seen my reaction. She'd seen this exact moment weeks before it occurred. And the final line written beneath that entry. "Thank you for watching me disappear." Someone needed to see it happen, to know it was real. I'm sorry it had to be you. I still practice psychiatry. I still treat patients with unusual experiences. But I listen differently now. When someone tells me they see things others don't, I don't immediately reach for diagnostic criteria. Because sometimes the impossible is just reality that hasn't caught up to itself yet. And sometimes, being witnessed is all that stands between existence and complete erasure. Story 4. The Architect's Blueprint. Andrew, I'm retired now, but this happened during my career as a commercial architect. You can share it, but please keep it anonymous. In 1998, I was hired to redesign a historic building in downtown Philadelphia. The structure dated back to 1923, originally built as a private hospital before being converted to office space in the 60s. My firm specialized in historic preservation, so this was exactly the kind of project I loved. The building had been empty for 3 years when I started the project. The previous tenants had left abruptly, citing structural concerns, though the engineering reports showed the building was sound. My job was to create a modern workspace while maintaining the historic character. I began with the standard process, photographing every room, measuring every dimension, documenting every architectural detail. The building had 4 floors and a basement, with the original hospital layout still partially visible beneath decades of modifications. It was during my 3rd site visit that I found the sealed room. I was on the 2nd floor, verifying measurements against the original 1923 blueprints, when I noticed a discrepancy. According to the plans, there should have been a small storage room at the end of the east corridor. But when I paced out the measurements, I was coming up about 12 feet short. I checked the walls. Solid plaster, no visible doors or seams. But the space was there, hidden behind what appeared to be a later addition. I contacted the building owner. He seemed surprised and gave me permission to investigate. A contractor cut through the plaster, revealing a doorway that had been sealed with brick and covered over. Behind the bricks was a room, exactly as shown on the original blueprints. But it wasn't empty. Inside were filing cabinets, medical equipment from the 1920s, and, most disturbing, patient files. Dozens of them covered in decades of dust. I should have stopped there. Called in a historian, perhaps, or at least informed the building owner before proceeding. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened one of the files. Patient name, Stephen Vincent. Admitted, March 15, 1923. Diagnosis: temporal displacement syndrome with associated delusions. The notes described a patient who claimed he could see multiple versions of the present moment occurring simultaneously. He drew diagrams showing rooms with multiple occupants existing in the same space but at different points in time. The attending physician's notes grew increasingly concerned, not because the patient was violent or dangerous, but because his descriptions of the hospital layout were impossibly accurate for locations he'd never visited. On April 2, 1923, Stephen Vincent died. Cause of death: unexplained. The final note read, "Patient expired while describing the room where they will seal my records." He sketched its location with disturbing precision. I pulled out the sketch. It showed the exact room I was standing in on the second floor, east corridor. The drawing included details that hadn't existed in 1923, the modern partition walls, the dropped ceiling tiles, even the location where the contractor had cut through the plaster. My hands started shaking. I opened more files. Patient after patient, all admitted in early 1923, all diagnosed with variations of temporal perception disorders. All deceased within weeks of admission. All under mysterious circumstances. And all of them had drawn pictures of the future. One file contained sketches of modern cars, recognizable as 1990s models. Another showed a smartphone, drawn with remarkable accuracy despite being created 70 years before smartphones existed. A third depicted the interior of the building as it appeared in the 1960s, after the office conversion. The final file I opened had no patient name. Instead, it had a date, June 18, 1998. That was today's date. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a detailed architectural drawing. It showed the second floor of the building with annotations marking exactly where I'd taken photographs, where I'd made measurements, where I'd found the sealed room. And in the corner of the drawing, in handwriting that looked like my own, was a note: "Discovered sealed room. Found this file. Left immediately." I did exactly that. I left the room, left the building, and called the owner from my car. I told him I'd found historic medical records that needed proper archival handling. I didn't mention the drawings or the impossible predictions. The owner hired a specialist to remove the files. I stayed away from the site for a week. When I returned, the sealed room had been emptied and properly integrated into the new floor plan. But something had changed. As I worked on the final designs, I started noticing small anomalies. Measurements that didn't quite match my notes. Rooms that seemed different from how I remembered photographing them. Nothing major, nothing I could definitively point to, but enough to make me uneasy. Then I found the envelope. It was slipped under the door of my office one morning, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a photocopy of a document I'd never seen before. An architectural drawing of the building, dated 1923, showing the second floor layout. But this version included a room that didn't exist in any of the official plans. A small chamber labeled "Observation Room," located exactly where my office had been set up in the temporarily vacant building. And in the margin, in faded pencil, was a note: "For the architect who will find this in June 1998. You are being observed across time. Your presence is part of the pattern. Do not attempt to change the design." Signed, S. Vincent. I checked the historical records. Stephen Vincent had been a patient, not an architect or hospital staff member. He had no reason to have access to architectural plans, let alone to create annotated versions predicting my presence 75 years later. I completed the project, but I made one significant change to my final designs. I eliminated the space where my office had been, redesigning that section to be an open corridor instead of a closed room. The building was renovated and reopened in 1999. It's been continuously occupied since then, with no reports of unusual activity. But here's what I've never told anyone. After the building reopened, I received one more envelope. No return address, postmarked from Philadelphia. Inside was a photograph, slightly yellowed with age. It showed the second floor of the building, taken from the east corridor. The photo appeared to date from the 1920s based on the image quality and the visible architectural details. But in the photograph, clearly visible through one of the windows, was a figure. A man in modern clothing, jeans and a work shirt, holding what appeared to be a digital camera. The figure looked exactly like me. On the back of the photograph, in the same handwriting as the previous note, was a simple message. "Time is not a line. It's a room with many windows. You were always here. SV." I've kept that photograph in a safe deposit box for 24 years. I've never shown it to anyone. I've never returned to that building, even though it's only an hour's drive from where I live now. Because if Stephen Vincent was right, if time is a room with many windows, then somewhere, in some version of 1923, I'm still standing in that sealed room, looking at files that describe my future. And somewhere, in some version of now, Stephen Vincent is looking back at me, watching me discover exactly what he knew I would find. Some rooms aren't sealed to keep things in. They're sealed to keep time itself from leaking through. Story 5. The Neuroscientist's Discovery. Andrew, I'm a tenured professor. This could destroy my career. Please be extremely careful with this story. I've spent 20 years studying human consciousness, focusing specifically on the neural correlates of subjective experience, what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. How does physical brain activity give rise to the subjective feeling of being someone, of experiencing qualia, of having a unified sense of self? 3 years ago, my research team developed a new neuroimaging technique that allowed us to map brain activity with unprecedented temporal and spatial resolution. We called it quantum coherence neuroimaging, or QCN. The technology was based on principles borrowed from quantum computing, using quantum entanglement to measure neural activity without the lag time associated with traditional fMRI or EEG. In theory, it could show us brain activity as it happened, with zero delay, capturing the precise moment when neural patterns gave rise to conscious experience. We ran initial trials with volunteers performing simple tasks, looking at images, listening to sounds, making decisions. The data was extraordinary. We could see consciousness emerging in real time, watch the brain construct reality moment by moment. But then we noticed something unexpected. In some subjects, the QCN showed brain activity that preceded the conscious experience by several seconds. Not the usual half-second delay between brain activity and awareness. We're talking about patterns of neural activation that appeared 3, 4, sometimes 5 seconds before the subject reported experiencing anything. At first, we thought it was a calibration error. But the pattern was consistent across multiple subjects and sessions. Then one of our grad students, Marcus, suggested something that seemed absurd. What if the brain activity we're seeing isn't preparation for consciousness? What if it's the echo of consciousness that hasn't happened yet? I dismissed the idea immediately. It violated every principle of causality. The future can't influence the past. Effects don't precede causes. But Marcus was persistent. What if consciousness exists slightly outside of time? What if the subjective experience of now is actually a narrow window that samples both the immediate past and the immediate future, and our QCN is sensitive enough to detect that? To humor him, and because the data genuinely puzzled me, I agreed to run a modified protocol. We would use the QCN to scan subjects while they made completely random choices, pressing one of 2 buttons based on pure whim, no predetermined pattern. The results were impossible. The QCN showed patterns of brain activity predicting which button the subject would press, appearing up to 6 seconds before the subject consciously decided and acted. But these weren't the usual premotor patterns we already knew about. These were patterns in the prefrontal cortex and posterior parietal regions, areas associated with conscious decision-making and self-awareness. It was as if the brain knew what choice would be made before the person consciously knew. We expanded the study. We scanned 20 subjects over 3 months, having them make hundreds of random choices while we mapped their brain activity. The prediction accuracy was 94%. We could see 6 seconds in advance which choice a person would make, even though they experienced their decision as spontaneous and free. That's when the volunteer experiences started becoming unusual. One subject, a graduate student named Rachel, reported feeling disconnected from her choices. She said it felt like she was watching herself make decisions rather than actively making them. "I'll think about pressing the left button," she said, "and then I'll watch my hand move to press it, but there's this weird gap between the thought and the action, like I'm not the one actually doing it." Another subject described something even stranger. "Sometimes," he said, "I know what I'm about to choose before I choose it. Not like I'm planning it. More like I'm remembering something that hasn't happened yet." We should have stopped then. Every ethical guideline, every safety protocol, told us we were in dangerous territory. But the data was too compelling. We were on the verge of answering the fundamental question of consciousness. Was free will real, or were we all just observers of predetermined choices? I volunteered to undergo the scanning myself. Marcus ran the session. I sat in the scanner, staring at the screen, waiting for the prompt to press one of 2 buttons. Simple, random choices. No pattern, no strategy. The first few trials felt normal. I'd see the prompt, decide which button to press it. Standard reaction time, nothing unusual. But around the 15th trial, something shifted. I saw the prompt, I decided to press the left button. But before my hand moved, I remembered pressing the right button. Not remembered like a memory of the past. Remembered like I'd already done it, like the action was already complete. And then my hand pressed the right button. I tried again. The next prompt appeared. I firmly decided, left button, definitely left button. But that same sensation washed over me, the memory of pressing the right button, the certainty that I'd already made that choice. My hand pressed the right button. I couldn't override it. Whatever choice I thought I was making, my hand followed the memory instead. Marcus stopped the session after 20 trials. His face was pale. "You were right every time," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "The QCN predicted all 20 of your choices. And in each case, the brain pattern appeared 6 seconds before the prompt even showed up on the screen. Your brain knew what choice you'd make before the option was even presented to you." I felt sick. That's impossible. I was making conscious choices. Were you? Or were you experiencing the memory of choices that had already been determined? We reviewed the data together. The patterns were undeniable. My brain activity showed the choice before the prompt, before my conscious deliberation, before any logical point at which I could have decided. It was as if my consciousness was simply observing a choice that had already been made by some deeper process I had no access to. We ran more sessions. The effect grew stronger. I started experiencing the pre-memories earlier and earlier, until I could feel the echo of my choices appearing almost before the trial began. And then I started feeling echoes outside the lab. I'd be driving home, approaching an intersection, and I'd suddenly have the memory of turning left, even though I'd planned to go straight. My hands would turn the wheel left, following the memory. I'd be in my office about to send an email and I'd remember closing the laptop instead. My hands would close the laptop. I told Marcus we needed to stop. He agreed. We shut down the QCN project, sealed the data, and I took a medical leave from the university. But the pre-memories didn't stop. They've continued for 3 years now, though they've changed. They're no longer just echoes of immediate actions. Now I sometimes remember entire conversations before they happen, remember events from days or weeks in the future. I know this sounds like psychosis. I've been evaluated by psychiatrists. Brain scans show no abnormalities. I'm on no medications. I have no history of mental illness. But I also know what I'm experiencing is real because the memories are accurate. I'll remember a conversation I'm going to have with a colleague, and then 2 days later we'll have that exact conversation word for word. I've started documenting these experiences. I write down what I remember before it happens, seal the document with a timestamp, then verify it afterward. I've successfully predicted 18 specific events in the past year, with details I couldn't possibly have guessed. Here's my theory, and it terrifies me. Consciousness doesn't exist in the present moment. It exists slightly ahead of time, sampling future states and creating the illusion of experiencing now. The QCN was sensitive enough to detect this temporal offset, and by observing it, we somehow amplified it. I didn't just discover that free will is an illusion. I discovered that the present moment is an illusion. We're all living slightly in the future, remembering our experiences before they occur, while our bodies act out the predetermined script. Most people never notice because the offset is so small, milliseconds, maybe a second or two at most. But the QCN changed something in my brain, stretched that offset wider, made me aware of the gap between consciousness and reality. I see it in others now too. I'll watch someone make a choice and I can see the micro-expression of pre-memory flash across their face. The brief moment when they remember what they're about to do before they consciously decide to do it. Everyone is living in an echo of the future. We just can't see it. 2 weeks ago, I had a pre-memory that's different from the others. More vivid, more certain, more final. I remember writing this account for you, Andrew. I remember sending it, waiting for you to read it, knowing you'll share it with people who need to understand what consciousness really is. And I remember what happens next. I remember the moment when I realize I can't distinguish between memory and experience anymore, when the pre-memories and the present moment merge completely, when I exist in all times simultaneously. I remember that moment arriving in 4 days. I don't know if I'll still be myself after that. I don't know if the person writing this will continue to exist in any meaningful way, but I needed someone to know. I needed to document what we discovered, even if I can't publish it through official channels. Consciousness is not what we think it is. Free will is not what we believe it is. The present moment is not when we think it is. We're all living in an echo, and some of us are about to catch up to the original. If you're reading this, it means I was right. It means the memory was accurate. It means I successfully sent this to you before the moment when everything changes. Or maybe I'm already in that moment, and this is just the memory of writing it, playing out exactly as it always was going to. I can't tell anymore. The echo is getting louder. And there we have it. 5 stories that challenge everything we think we know about reality, time, and consciousness itself. I want to thank the individuals who trusted me with their experiences. The medical resident, the physicist, the psychiatrist, the architect, and the neuroscientist. Sharing something this personal and this potentially career-destroying takes real courage. What strikes me most about these stories is this: they're not about ghosts or demons or traditional horror. They're about something far more unsettling, the possibility that reality itself is not what it seems. That time doesn't flow the way we think it does. That consciousness operates in ways our current understanding cannot explain. These are the truly terrifying moments. Not jump scares or violence, but the slow realization that the fundamental assumptions we make about existence might be wrong. If tonight's stories resonated with you, or disturbed you, or made you question things you thought you knew, hit that like button and subscribe. Which story got to you the most? Which one made you rethink something you'd always taken for granted? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And to those 5 storytellers, I hope sharing your experiences brought some measure of relief. You're not alone in what you've witnessed. Reality is stranger than any of us want to admit. Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep your mind questioning, and remember, the most profound horror isn't what we can see. It's what we can't help but understand. Stay safe out there.